James moved to the window and peered out. Sure enough, the sunset sky seemed to be gone, replaced by a blur of blocky, shadowy shapes. Dots of lights flashed by, along with complicated metal struts and girders. He leaned forward and peered down. A moment later, his knees weakened as he saw nothing but empty space below the train. Dim blue space fell away to distant clouds lit with the waning sun. "We're upside down," Zane announced soberly, clapping James on the shoulder. "We're on the underside of the track now, letting the Muggles go by on top. Seems only fair, since they built the tracks in the first place." "That's," James said faintly. He glanced ahead, past the Zephyr's front windows, saw that they were indeed rocketing along on the underside of the elevated railway. Ghostly tracks glimmered ahead of the Zephyr, cast magically by the train itself. "That is completely excellent." "Ralph," Zane said, glancing up at the train's ceiling, "you forgot to secure your stuff, dude." Ralph peered at Zane, his face pale. "What do you mean? How can you tell?" "Because," Zane replied, smiling and plopping into the seat next to his friend, "your cauldron cakes are stuck to the ceiling now. Sorry. The magical gravity only works on living things." James turned and looked up at the sticky buns plastered to the ceiling. He laughed. Outside, a flash of bright purple light exploded with blinding force, rocking the train so hard that James collapsed onto Ralph. The train jerked violently, slewing back and forth under the elevated tracks, and the interior lights flickered wildly. In the rear of the carriage, a window shattered, spraying glass and letting in a howl of rushing wind. Commuters screamed and covered their heads, jostling away from the blast. "What's happening?" James yelled, trying to scramble up. "Is this part of the ride?" Zane shook his head, his eyes wide. "No, that was magic! Somebody attacked us!" Another bolt of purple light slammed against the side of the train, rocking it over onto its right wheels. A curtain of sparks flew past the windows as the roof screeched against the elevated track's steel supports. "Hold on!" the engineer shouted. James turned to look and saw him jerk the steering levers again. The train lurched to the right, slamming back down onto the ghostly tracks and spinning up into the dying sunlight. The Muggle subway train was past now, fortunately, allowing the Zephyr to thump back down onto the main track with a rocking crash. It continued to hurtle forward, careening between buildings and over bridges. "Who is attacking us?" Merlin asked Benjamin Franklin, climbing to his feet in the swaying train. I don't know," Franklin stammered, struggling to stay upright in his seat. "I can't see anything." James looked up as the big man moved behind the row of seats, pushing through the frightened passengers towards the side of the train that had been battered. James followed Merlin's gimlet gaze. There were 3 figures flying alongside the train, black against the blurring cityscape. Another purple flash shot from one of the figures, shattering more windows and forcing the train to vibrate on its tracks. "Mr. Engineer," Merlin commanded loudly, producing his staff, "now would be a good time for us to take evasive action." The goblin engineer glanced back at Merlin over his shoulder, his eyes bulging. "What do you expect me to do? We're on a train if you haven't noticed." "A magical train," Merlin corrected quickly. "One that can, apparently, make its own tracks. I suggest that you do so, sir. I'll do what I can with our pursuers." "There are more on this side!" Franklin cried out, pointing. He fumbled for his own wand as 2 more blasts erupted, one on each side. The train leapt off the tracks and then crashed down again, screeching horribly. Passengers scrambled over one another, crying out in fear. "Here goes none!" the engineer called, gripping the steering controls. A moment later, the train leapt off the tracks again, following its own set of ghostly rails. The rails curved sideways and down, leading the train completely off the railway bed. Merlin used his staff to fire at the dark shapes outside as they angled to follow the train. His bolt struck one of the figures, which jerked and spun away, falling from its broom. The other two figures arced closer, shadowing the train as it hurled through the air. "I can't hold her up like this," the engineer yelled, struggling with the levers. "She's too heavy to go unsupported." "Then put her down," Merlin commanded, still firing. A blast of purple light engulfed the right side of the train, forcing it into a barrel roll just as it began to descend. James gripped his seat as hard as he could while the world rolled over ahead of them. The train righted itself just as it struck the pavement of the busy street below, squeezing between lines of dense traffic. "We're gonna crash!" Ralph yelled. "At the intersection!" James looked ahead and saw what Ralph meant. A line of buses and cabs was lumbering slowly through the intersection, crossing directly in front of the train. "Wands!" James shouted, producing his own and pointing it wildly toward the front of the train. "Zane and I will take the cabs! Ralph, you get the bus!" Ralph's eyes widened, but he didn't argue. The three boys stabbed their wands forward and called the incantation, "Wingardium Leviosa!" at exactly the same moment. James felt adrenaline surge up his arm, powering the magic, and the first of the cabs lofted immediately into the air, turning sideways. He dropped it a moment later, letting it fall halfway onto a blue police car as he aimed at another cab. Together, he and Zane succeeded in levitating the cabs out of the way. Ralph grunted, and his arm trembled as the bus finally shoved forward, its rear end rising and sliding sideways. A moment later, the Zephyr rammed through the space, barely missing the disheveled traffic. The three boys fell back into their seats amidst the screams of their fellow passengers. More bolts of magic fired between the train and the flying figures, and James sensed that his dad and the others were waging their own battle from further back in the train. "We can't keep this up!" the engineer shouted, gripping the controls and veering the train through the Muggle traffic. "It's not what we're made for, and we're breaking nearly every code of railway conduct in the book!" James scrambled in his seat, prepared to use his own wand to fight the flying dark figures, when a hand fell on his shoulder, gently but with surprising strength. "Have a seat, James," a female voice said. "Don't you worry." James craned to look. Behind him, standing calmly amidst the terrified passengers, was the unusual woman he had first met in the halls of Atlantis, the one who had told him he was so like his grandfather, James I. She smiled down at him. "Merlinus is doing his best," she said, almost whispering, "but this isn't really his element, you know." She winked at him and then stepped lightly over to the window on the opposite side of the train. She raised her hand, wandless, and pointed at one of the dark figures that flew alongside the train. There was a faint, bluish flash, and the figure seemed to freeze in the air so suddenly and completely that its cloak ceased flapping. It dropped to the street like a stone, crashing against the windscreen of a taxi. The other figures fell quickly thereafter, dropping the moment the woman pointed at them, her face mild, almost amused. "Did you see that?" Zane demanded, gripping James's arm. "Is she with you?" "I've never seen her before in my life," Ralph called back, "but I'm glad she's on our side." James looked aside at Merlin, but the big wizard hadn't noticed. He was busy aiming for the last pursuer on his side of the train. His face was shiny with sweat, pinched in exertion. Whoever the woman was, she certainly appeared to be correct. The city definitely wasn't Merlin's element. The last cloaked figure swooped upwards over the train and disappeared from view. A moment later, it appeared again, directly in front of the train as it hurtled forward. "Go home, Harry Potter!" the figure yelled back, its face hidden behind a metallic mask, its voice magically amplified so that it resonated throughout the entire train. "Consider this a warning! Take your people and go home! Go home while the WULF is willing to let you go!"